Glenn Howells is director and founder of Glenn Howells Architects. The practice is headquartered in Birmingham, but works around the country with a number of major housing projects in London, including Royal Wharf and London City Island. So Glenn, your website homepage says, "We imagine how future cities can enhance lives and adapt to change." So how are you imagining the post-COVID city?
I think there's two parts to that. One is that, I don't know, we've been in this for a few months now, and I remember I'd got all sorts of brilliantly clear ideas when it hit that this was going to change cities forever. And then, I don't know what you think, but what I'm starting to notice is, I think cities are resilient, and we've had pandemics before, and I'm not saying this isn't significant at all as an event, but our cities will return, and they always have returned. So there is a longer term view of that this is sort of a detour in the road, and nobody was really expecting it, but it may not completely transform cities forever, because we've had pandemics before, we've had big events before. There was an exodus out of Victorian cities. Where I'm sitting at the moment, Birmingham, it had pandemics that led Chamberlain to reorganize the whole of the city, and its regeneration was because of a pandemic, because of poor conditions. So I think the long-term outlook, I think, is still very positive. I can't believe that human beings won't continue to want to physically gather.
We need policies and thinking in order to make that happen, don't we? So don't we need leadership from the architecture profession, people like you, to tell us what we ought to be doing?
Yeah, I was going to get to that, but I was just thinking, don't overreact. I think the first thing I've been sort of thinking about is, let's not panic and say, that's it. We've now created these cities, which are going to be useless things. They're really good things, but maybe just thinking about how we do adapt them, because we've got to get over the short to medium term fear and anxiety that some of our cities create. So I do think there are some things that we need to think about re-engineering in our cities. So, for example, I just think choice is now going to be a massive thing in cities. We've all pretty much got the choice whether we decide to travel to work or we travel to go places. And choice and that decision making is a big shift, because up until Christmas, we were told where we would work and we were told where we'd go to meetings. That choice now has taken over. So in a funny way, there might be an argument that the most successful cities in the future will be the ones that people want to go to rather than have to go to. So maybe the whole quality thing shifts. So coming back to what does that mean for decision makers and architects, I don't think this is the time where we should sort of lower our ambitions for how great cities ought to be, because ultimately the most successful ones will be the ones that draw people to them, as holiday locations are. And what we're seeing at the moment is the first cracks in the lockdown have been people desperate to go to other places, to get away from what they've been locked down into. I think the similar thing will happen to our towns and cities, but in terms of workplace and in terms of leisure and in terms of other experiences that we'll want. But you'll only go to ones which are fantastic, possibly.
So great opportunities for architects and planners to create great cities. And you work in Manchester, you work in Birmingham, Liverpool, as well as London. So how do you think these places are going to change as you see the government rebalancing the UK economy?
I mean, I think London's a very special city, and it's terrific, and it will always have a place in our economy as a really important, as an important sort of locator, and it's iconic and it's got fantastic things there. But I think it's also an opportunity for the great regional cities that Michael Heseltine has sort of spoken about so passionately, to re-emerge and start, as they did in the 19th century, to become more equal. And the reasons for that, I think, two or threefold. One is that the experience of the last few months is, just in terms of residential accommodation, is you can get double the amount of space for the same amount of money in a regional city. And so if you're thinking about working from home, then that's a major factor. And I think also the ability to have generous outdoor space is going to be a massive factor as well. So I think there will be. Birmingham's already done very well out of the exodus of people in their 30s. I think more so than Manchester even, of people getting to a point and then realizing they have to live an hour and a half out of central London to work in London. I think what you'll find is, I think the regional cities will benefit because people who want culture, want education, want the buzz of a city can move to a smaller city, which is far more affordable. I think the other reason I think regional cities like Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, etc., will do very well is there's lots of organisations. There's one we know just moving into Paradise in Birmingham, into the development we're working on, and they've realised that they don't need less space; they need more space because of flexibility, distancing, and so it's a lot more. It's a lot more achievable when you're paying £40 a square foot than 80 or £100 a square foot. So I think it's a good thing. I think there will be a rebalancing. And what we're finding is we're doing a job with Tom Bloxham in Birmingham, Urban Splash, and Jonathan Falkingham, which is really interesting. And it's a low density residential district, and all the homes there, a lot of them are the prefab ones, the volumetric ones, have got then lots of permutations how you can work from it and live in it. So I think those opportunities very difficult to do when you've got very, very high land values.
London will keep going. So what key London projects are you working on at the moment, and have they been affected by the current crisis?
Yeah, they have been. I mean, I think nobody said stop at the moment. I think, but a few people have said let's just pause and just see what happens. But we're working largely in East London, that sort of stretch of the north bank of the Thames, all the way from Isle of Dogs down to just beyond the Thames barrier, and we've got a string of developments we're looking at there. And what we're finding there is that they are still proceeding, but we have made adjustments to them at the same time. And I think we were quite fortunate on the Wardian building, which is, I think people have just moved into it today, is that we provided continuous huge balconies, gardens. So some of the apartments have got 30% of their floor area as external space. And I just think, you know, so the idea that you do a tall building and you don't have the ability to have ample internal space, but as importantly, decent outside space, has worked quite well. So that was a fortunate sort of turn of events, because nobody saw COVID as being an influence on that. But what we're doing is learning from that, and then all the other developments we're looking at, we're thinking, how can we provide great amenity space? So if there is another lockdown, how can you then provide safe, protected amenity space, which you can still then use, and private amenity space, and even things like gyms. Gyms are, you know, all the fitness sort of things that would normally be in an indoor environment. We've been rethinking those and just thinking, okay, well, maybe those are outdoor now. So outdoor pools, outdoor exercise areas. And the other one is, I mean, I cycle, you cycle, but there is sort of an approach to the cycle facilities in these buildings, which is about they're compliant and we need 1,000 spaces. So then you serry up all the bike racks, and they're pretty miserable experiences. I think cycling will have a complete rejuvenation as a result of this. I mean, I'm trying to get one of my bikes fixed at the moment. They said, oh, we can get round to that in October. Just, you can't buy a bike, you can't get your bike fixed. So where are all the bikes going to go, and how elegant and how friendly and also how spacious can you get that experience to be? So the bike, rather than being something that you have to then sort of tuck away into a dark basement, I think the way that these developments start to handle cycling, and indeed, you know, rethinking through cycle routes and access through the whole development, is an important one as well.
So is Birmingham building a lot of new cycle lanes, permanent ones as well as pop-up ones?
Birmingham, yeah, it's doing the pop-up ones, but it's got some money. Andy Street's doing a great job here, and he's managed to prize some money to connect up with that. We've got a great canal network, so there's a big investment into our cycle network, which is terrific, because up until now it's been one of the most difficult cities to cycle around, and we've already got we've got connections from the city centre out to the universities, and that will just continue.
Yes, I have to say, I think it's really important that London does more to provide the right sort of infrastructure like that, because if we're to keep some of those young people who are wanting to move to Birmingham, Manchester, we have to provide the right facilities for them.
You'll always have lots of young people. Don't worry, Peter. There's going to be no shortage of young people desperate to get their sort of years in London. It's just at the moment, if they decide to have children, it's very difficult to stay in central London.
Boris Johnson wants to build, but we also have to plan as well. So what do you think of the government's white paper on planning policy, particularly around the idea of zoning and codes?
I think, as you were saying earlier, you can remember a few recessions. I can sort of remember 2 or 3 now stated planning revolutions where the government will tear up the rule book and unleash all this potential. Look, there's nothing wrong. I think it's a great idea to accelerate the delivery of homes and the way we build them. I think also, if you look at it, I think there's only Switzerland that builds more expensively than we do. So there's lots of other places which build cheaper, quicker, with less red tape. So the idea that you can do things better and you can smarten the way we build is great. I also really like the idea that you re-engineer it so you don't have to be doing 10,000 homes a year to have a chance of doing this, that you can scale it so you get medium and smaller companies setting up to do housing is really interesting. I also like the idea that we catch up with places like Vancouver, where you go to a digital plan-based system. So you click onto a site and you can see immediately, you know, how tall it needs to be, what the codes are, and then you start to see if it's viable. And it's a more sort of, how can I say, user-friendly, consumer-based approach to planning than something which is 1940s top-down. So I like all that. I suppose the things which I'm trying to figure out is it going to work? And the reason I'm you know, the devil's in the detail, but the things which I think need a bit more thinking through, I don't think it's good enough just to say, well, we've coded it into these 3 areas, you zone it, and then you've got a code book, and then all of a sudden you'll get it. Because what we don't need is just more houses. What we need are more houses, better houses, but better neighborhoods, better districts, and at the same time be tackling carbon. I think what we have at the moment in the white paper will probably get us more houses. I'm not sure it gives us 2 and 3. So, you know, I think the idea that you overly rely on a design code, and then it's a checklist, and then if you get enough ticks, you can build, sort of takes away the design discussion with a local authority or with a panel or design review panel that no doubt over the last 10 years have made the best changes to some of the schemes that I've seen happen. So the fact that it goes automatic once you've got a zone, in that lies potentially the danger that you could end up with quite poor schemes.
Yes, although I would say the experience of it's not exactly a code, but it works in a similar way of the London Mayor's Housing Design Guide, is that it does actually give you a median quality. It certainly got rid of the really worst designed housing, I think, and you see very little really bad schemes in London these days, but it is, might say, a restraint on creativity and innovative thinking.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the thing is, a design code can stop the worst ever happening, but it won't drive the best solution. So the idea that planning becomes a passive sort of gateway, and then it somehow suggests that the bar might be lowered, even though there's talk in the white paper about beautiful buildings. That's not my worry. It's just I don't understand what the process is.
Well, I think there is quite a lot of detail still to come from the white paper, and indeed to see the national model code, which will at least help give us some idea of how this will be implemented.
Do you remember the National Planning Framework, which was, I think, Greg Clark in 2010-11? That was a revolution in planning, and what was interesting about that one, that was about moving from restrictive planning to positive planning, which was you equip a local authority to then develop a local plan, and it guides and encourages the best development to happen. I think what we're seeing at the moment is the government's reacting to delays and a perceived slowness in the planning process after maybe 10 years of stripping planning authorities of the resources so they could process stuff. I don't think that the private sector on its own, when you remove all of the legislation and you remove process on its own, will necessarily come up with the best outcomes. I think the state has got a role to play in enabling, guiding, coordinating the work of many different private sector organisations. So positive planning. I don't think we should give up on planning.
Yes. Well, Glenn, thank you very much for your comments and your insights. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the flesh at the NNA sometime soon. And I must clearly come up to Birmingham as well and see what's going on there. Thank you very much.
Lovely to talk to you, Peter. All right. Bye-bye.